Welcome, everybody, to the Daily Fantasy Pivot on RotoCurve. We, of course, are a show aimed to teach the masses, you guys, how to play this game of daily fantasy baseball. It's going to be an interesting slate today. There are a lot of bad pitchers facing a lot of good hitters. So we were talking before the show, and I think this is going to be all out anarchy in the show today. I mean, we are all going in different directions. There is just so many options, so it will be a fun show today. But don't forget to check out the free roll this Friday. You, of course, can find the MLB tools on rotocurve.com, NBA tools, PGA tools, pretty much any tools you want. Let us get to the hosts for today. I know I'm not the only one. You can probably hear I'm battling a cold today, but it sounds like one other of us is not feeling 100% today. Benny, welcome to the sick train. Let's fight through it.
Yeah, this is my Michael Jordan sick game right here. I'm trying not to be the second life form to yak on this show after Ricky's dog a couple weeks ago. So hopefully I can get through an hour here.
Yeah, there's something in the air here. I don't know what it is, but it's affecting all of us, and we don't even live close to each other. But somehow my dog, me, you, just about everyone involved in this show cannot make it through healthy. We need a disabled list. We actually need a minor leagues for the RotoCurve daily pivot so we can call some people up when some of us are suffering. Let's bring in Nick. He's dressed for the game that he's going to after. Nick, where are you going?
Yeah, I'm going to go check out them Blues and Blackhawks tonight, man. I'm pumped. I know the Blackhawks own us, but this is the year, man. This is the year we break the curse.
Yeah, I'm from Chicago. I'm not much of a hockey fan. The only thing I do know is that Ladd is sitting out tonight. He's having a baby, so that will be interesting. But beyond that, I couldn't tell you anything about hockey. I just happened to be in a group text where that was being discussed. Let's move on to Mr. Collacchi himself. Collacchi, what do we got going on with the backwards hat today? It doesn't look like it's the Fantasy Draft one or the DraftKings one. What do we got going on today?
No, it's actually USA Baseball. I just wanted to kind of represent the country tonight. But you mentioned earlier, Ricky, the fact that we had bad pitchers. We were just looking up R.J. Swindle. For everybody listening, if you don't know who R.J. Swindle is, you don't need to know. He's a guy that threw a 57-mile-an-hour curveball for the Phillies about 6 or 7 years ago. So basically, R.J. Swindle is what you're going to see from a lot of pitchers tonight. So get ready for some bats.
Yeah, I don't really think I had some material planned out for, time passer tonight to get the show started, but I don't really think we have time for a whole lot other than this slate because there are a ton of games and there are a ton of pitchers worth looking into. Let's get started with the pitchers because there are very, very, very many bad ones on the slate tonight, but there are not many good ones, especially with the news that Steven Strasburg was scratched with an illness. Maybe he was hanging out with Benny beforehand. I know I wasn't hanging out with him, but he's sick too, so it's going to be Tanner Roark tonight. I mean, what the hell are we doing at starting pitcher tonight, Josh?
Well, I think the Strasburg thing was a blessing in disguise. I don't like to target guys that have pitched against the same team within like a 10-day period, and Strasburg was one of those guys tonight against the Braves. We saw what happened against the Braves when Scherzer pitched against them a few days ago, where they touched him up for a few runs in the first inning. They ended up putting 5 earned on his slate. So I think Strasburg being out is a blessing for people that did want to roster him. But for those that were going to fade him, like myself, and I'm pretty sure a lot of other people as well, I think it's going to hurt a little bit because now that ownership percentage is going to be a lot higher on my number one pitcher for tonight in Carlos Carrasco against Tampa Bay. The reason why I think Carrasco has a chance to be the number one guy tonight is not necessarily just because of the price, which is definitely a lot higher than everybody else on the slate, but that matchup against the Tampa Bay Rays. Last season, they were one of the worst in baseball against righties. And this season it's gotten even better. As looking here, they have just a 302 WOBA, a 167 ISO, which is pretty high, but that's pretty much the only time they'd be getting on base, as they've been striking out 25% of the time in a small sample size. So Carrasco, for me, an elite strikeout pitcher, doesn't walk a lot of guys. He gets that ballpark boost in Tropicana. He's my number one tonight.
There you go. It appears we're having technical difficulties, so bear with us. Collacchi, check your group text. But let's move on to Benny when it comes to starting pitchers. We got Carrasco mentioned. Is there anything worthwhile below him that you feel comfortable with? Let's start with cash games.
I mean, the short answer to that question is no. Other than Carrasco, you're basically taking chances tonight. But if you're playing on a site like DraftKings where you need two pitchers, you need to put a second one in there. So there's a couple guys that I'm looking at, and I know a couple of the guys that you guys talked about. So one guy who I think I might be the only person on tonight is Mike Leake. Now, the reason why I like Leake is he usually struggles most with left-handed bats. He's going up against Milwaukee today in a good pitcher's park in St. Louis, and Milwaukee doesn't have any left-handed bats, really. I mean, the two biggest left-handed bats on the team are Scooter Gennett and Jonathan Villar, basically. So I know there are some guys that can mash on that team. They got Chris Carter now, who's basically either a home run or a strikeout every time. Ryan Braun is always a solid option, but I don't really like this Milwaukee lineup all that much today. So I think for my second guy who I'm willing to take a chance on, Mike Leake is somebody that's one of the guys that I have on my radar and I'm going to be using today.
Yeah, one of the things I look at, I don't really put a lot of stock into it, but I'd look at the batter versus pitcher data before I start, and admittedly, only 4 batters on Milwaukee have a history against Mike Leake. It's only 63 total at bats, but they have slashed 349, 406, 508 against him. So that was something I looked at. Again, I don't think it's necessarily worth taking into account. I agree with you that Mike Leake, I'm going to try and go mid-tier pitchers tonight. We'll get to the hitters because there's just so many of them that I think it's hard to pay up for at least Carrasco and a second one, but maybe even just to pay up for Carrasco limits your bats more than I'm comfortable with. So it's going to be interesting tonight. I got to play around with roster construction. Nick, who do you like at starting pitcher? Are you on board with some of those same guys, or are you going in different directions?
Yeah, I obviously like Carrasco for cash. He's far and away the most expensive pitcher on the slate, and I think he's going to be super high owned on FanDuel, especially where you only have to play one pitcher. So he's going to be the chalk. But 2 other guys catching my eye are Drew Smyly against Carrasco in that game for the Rays. I know his sample size from last year, but across 66 innings, he had a 10.4 strikeouts per 9 and 28% K rate with a 10.2% swinging strike rate. So those are elite numbers on this slate tonight. And the Indians just aren't hitting at all right now. They're 25th in WOBA against lefties, 24th in strikeout percentage. So I think Smyly sets up for a good spot. And on FanDuel, you want that win. So both those pitchers are in a good spot. And I don't know if either's going to be able to get the win in a low-scoring game. So I'm also looking at Jared Eichhoff for the Phillies. He has elite strikeout numbers, not elite, but for the slate, they're elite. 8.36 Ks per 9, 22.9% strikeout rate. His hard hit percentage is really high from last year, 35.8. I think it's the highest on the slate, so that's a little concerning, but I think he has a good chance to get a win against these Padres who are throwing out Colin Ray for that starting pitcher tonight.
Yeah, well, the good thing, let's go to Eichhoff because I think he's definitely viable on this slate when you're going to have to look for mid-tier. And, what I like to do on Fangraphs is sort with last year's stats, but factoring in, active roster, which shows, if these guys on the team now were on the team last year, what their stats would have looked like. And, the Padres are obviously without Justin Upton. And so their numbers were bad last year, but you put in this current roster and they're even worse. And you mentioned the hard hit percentage, and it looks like by 0.1%, Padres were not quite the worst in terms of hard hit percentage against righties last year. There were 2 teams, the Cubs and Red Sox at 20, but they were right there along with them against right-handed pitching. They did not hit the ball hard a lot. So if that's the concern with Eichhoff, I think he's going to be able to get away with it tonight. He's definitely one of my favorite mid-tiers tonight. And one guy that I think I feel more confident with tonight than the rest of you guys is Phil Hughes. And it pains me to do it, but, when I'm thinking of where I want to fit tonight, where I want to spend up, it's not really starting pitcher. There are just so many bats that I think, all of a sudden you spend up for Carrasco and you buy a crappy bat versus you spend down on Phil Hughes and you buy, some of the expensive bats that I think you can get, 20 fantasy points out of a lot of studs. So I'm willing to take that chance. And you look at Phil Hughes, and I don't like to use the BVP numbers too much, but I mean, last year versus the White Sox, he threw 8 innings of 1-run ball. That was at home. That was the only game at home, and Phil Hughes' splits last year were drastically better at home, which he'll be pitching at tonight. He threw 7 innings of 2 earned runs and 6 innings of 3 earned runs. So 3 times 3 quality starts. And now I know they added Todd Frazier, so it's a little bit better of an offense. But, Hughes' numbers at home, the wind actually is blowing in, which I like to see. In Minnesota. So, Hughes, against a mediocre offense for a reasonable price, that's the reason I like him. And I actually think he can be used in cash for that reason. It's a little risky, but on this slate, I mean, you can't just start Carrasco. And if you do, you're going to have to be perfect with the bats you put in. And I'd rather, take the shot with my bats. Let's go to tournaments. Is there anyone we haven't listed for tournaments that you're interested in? Let's go to you, Benny.
Yeah, it's not so much the guys that we haven't listed. The guys that we talked about are the guys that I like in tournaments. I think the way to go in tournaments is along the lines of what you were just saying, though. Everybody's going to be playing Carrasco tonight because he's far and away the best option at pitcher. So for a tournament, the way that you can kind of go away from it is do exactly what you said. Spend up on your bats and then put in some of these other mid-tier guys that we talked about. The guys like a Hughes or an Eckhart or, a Mike Leake or whoever it is that you happen to want to roll out there. I mean, what I try to do is find really bad offenses and take the pitcher that's going up against them. I mean, it worked pretty well last night. Whatever side of the San Diego Philly game you took, you got a pretty good performance out of, either Morton or Erlin. And I think that's kind of the way you want to go today. For tournaments, you want to do what other people aren't doing. So if everybody is just clicking Carrasco and building their lineup that way, you want to do something different. So use a couple of these other guys that we talked about and then, pay up at the bats. I think that's probably the better way to attack a tournament tonight.
Yeah, I mean, the only reason you wouldn't want to do that is if, Carrasco puts in, a Noah Syndergaard-esque type outing where, he's above and beyond the best starting pitcher of the night, and there are going to be people with pretty perfect bats along with it. So it's going to be hard to win a tournament without that top guy. And I'm not sold on the fact that Carrasco is going to be that guy tonight. Well, I think he's completely safe for cash, and on 2 starting pitcher sites, I'm definitely going to use him as one of my starting pitchers and figure it out beyond him. I think on on FanDuel, you could go about it a different way with only the one pitcher. So I'm not sold that we're going to get that 13 strikeout outing from Carrasco. He's obviously the biggest strikeout threat for him, but in tournaments, I think you would be pretty smart to not use him, even though obviously there's a decent chance that he does get it done. Collacchi, do you want to talk about Yordano Ventura a little bit more? Because I know you're on him for tournaments tonight, so let's explain why.
Yeah, targeting pitchers against the Astros is strictly a tournament play for me, basically the second half of all last year and, of course, this year going forward, because they just have an elite amount of power. We've seen guys like George Springer get hot, Carlos Correa, of course, Preston Tucker can hit home runs, and they have other guys in that lineup like Tyler White now, who just seems like he can't get out. So that offense is excellent, but the one thing that they do is strike out. Last year they had one of the highest strikeout rates in baseball. This year it's right up at the top as well. And it's mostly due to the fact that they are not very patient at the plate. Jose Altuve, excellent hitter. We're not going to disagree about that. I think everybody agrees that he's one of the top 5 contact guys in the game, but he does not walk. He swings a lot. George Springer strikes out a lot. Even Correa has above average strikeout numbers. So this is why I'm looking at a guy like Ventura, because the only time Ventura gets into trouble is when he walks guys. Against a team like the Astros who do not walk very much, I think it's worth taking a risk in tournaments, given the fact that he does have high strikeout upside against the Astros.
I agree with you. I would only use him in tournaments, though, even though I am a Ventura's fan for this year. I think that Astros offense is just too good, even with most of them favoring lefties. Correa and Altuve, 2 of the best hitters on earth against left-handed pitching. They're still good against righties, so that's something I want to avoid. Nick, do you have anything else at the starting pitcher position for us? It looks like you don't. So let's go ahead and move to hitters, because I think we've covered it all, unless anyone has anything else to say. Let's go to catchers. Catcher's interesting tonight. Very, very difficult position. It's maybe the only position that's not loaded to the max tonight. So what are you doing there?
I assume you're talking to me.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. There's 3 or 4 guys on my list. I'm looking at Jared Saltalamacchia for the Tigers, who's starting in place of James McCain, who's out for a couple weeks now, and Miguel Montero for the Cubs against Alfredo Simon. And then Wellington Castillo against Alex Wood. I mean, I like to pay down at catcher. All those dudes are super cheap. I can't pay up for Buster Posey tonight, who's $4,900 playing at Coors. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'm looking at Saltalamacchia, Castillo, and Miguel Montero. I know Castillo doesn't have an extra base hit yet, an RBI or anything yet, but his prices come way down. Gets a lefty-righty matchup. He crushed the ball against lefties last season with a huge hard hit percentage of I think like 39%. So I love that spot for him at 2,500 on FanDuel.
Yeah, you kind of read down my list already. I got nothing extra to add to that. Collacchi, what do you think of catcher? Is that pretty much what you got?
Yeah, I have Castillo as well. The other guy I wanted to mention was Salvador Perez, but considering you can get you can get Castillo a lot cheaper, and Perez is hitting seventh, I just saw Castillo is now hitting cleanup, so that's a huge spot for a catcher. And I feel like all of us have nicknames for him. I know Benny calls him Beef Wellington. I call him Whelpington because I know Ricky remembers that. We had a night last year where I needed 3 or 4 points to ship a GPP, and Whelpington went 0 for 4 with 3 Ks. So that's going to be his nickname for me for the rest of the time that I play DFS. But for tonight, that lefty-righty matchup, you got a catcher hitting cleanup. I think he's a plug-and-play for me right now.
Yeah, I'm with you. I have a love-hate relationship with Whelpington. I think he was I might have been out on that night too, and he destroyed me, but there was a night where he had 2 homers, so I remember there were times last year, as is the case with daily fantasy, where you love a guy and hate a guy in the course of 3 days. Your feelings drastically change. Benny, you got anything else to catch it for us, or is that it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of Wellington Castillo. He's going to be the guy that I have in a lot of lineups. He's hitting fourth. You look at all these other catchers, a lot of them are hitting seventh, eighth, ninth in the lineup. I'll take the guy that's hitting behind Paul Goldschmidt, having a really good chance to, drive in some runs tonight because he's probably going to get up at some point with people on. I don't like Alex Wood very much. He's a guy who I think is incredibly overrated. And Castillo's already 2 for 5 lifetime against this guy with a home run. And, like Josh just said, if you can get a catcher who's the same price as all these other guys that we're mentioning, but he's hitting fourth and all these other guys are hitting, seventh, eighth, and ninth in the lineup, it just makes sense to roll him out there. The only other guy I want to mention, I do like Jason Castro a little bit for Houston. I think that he could be a guy that could be sneaky. He's a left-handed bat going up against Yordano Ventura. Ventura struggles with the lefties. He's at home in Houston, which is a good hitter's park, and he's 4 for 8 lifetime against Ventura already. So in some tournaments where I think Castillo is going to be kind of chalky tonight, I'm probably going to try to swerve away and go to Castro in a couple spots there. But again, I mean, don't try to overthink it. You got a catcher that's hitting fourth, that's pretty cheap, that's in a good matchup, hitting in the lineup that should score some runs tonight. I think Castillo is probably the #1 option by a good margin here for cash games.
Yeah, the only other name I want to mention is a guy with a good BVP, but it's also a good matchup. Now Tanner Roark's kind of stepping in when he wasn't expecting to, so I don't know if that means he's going to throw better, worse. My guess would mean he would throw worse than when he was ready, but A.J. Brzezinski hitting 6 against him. In his career, he's 7 for 8 against him with 2 homers, so that's pretty substantial. If you need the extra $100 from Wellington Castillo, I would suggest moving down if you go 100 over budget like I do so often when you want to throw things at the wall. There's your easy pivot right there. Instead of changing up one of your good hitters to a slightly less good hitter, I'd just move it around to catcher. Sounds like that's all we got there, so let's move on to first base. This position is ridiculous. And Benny, I want to build on your point there with Alex Wood, just how not good I think he is, or how overrated, I guess. I think he's a fine pitcher, but looking at, from July on last year, he really has been consistently struggling. Let's look at his ERAs by month: 4.91, 4.11, 5.08, and then he had 1 start in October, 2.57. So that doesn't even really count. I mean, that was 3 months on. He was struggling. He didn't look good this spring. He had a poor outing in the first one. I think he had 10 base runners in 5 innings. So he's just been bad for a while. And these are his splits from last season. He allowed 343 WOBA to right-handed hitters, 228 to lefties. So slash lines 284, 359, 427 against righties, and then lefties were 219, 243, 274. So he was not doing well, and literally all the production was coming from right-handed hitters, which to me is why I'm using Paul Goldschmidt tonight, regardless of what he costs. He's my guy at first base, so that was a long-winded way of saying it, but basically righties crush him, and he's been bad. So this is the righty that I think is going to crush him on the Diamondbacks. Let's go to you, Collacchi. Why don't you get us started at first base beyond Goldschmidt?
Yeah, I think Goldschmidt's a guy that you can just honestly plug in if you have the money to do so. But I think I'm spending up a little bit at pitcher tonight, especially in cash games. I like to do that pretty much all the time with the volatility from hitters. Of course, anybody can go 0 for 4 at a given time, but better pitchers usually score more points on a consistent basis. So if you are spending down at first base, a guy I like, and I don't think you're going to see that much of a drop-off in production, is Adrian Gonzalez against Ruby De La Rosa. De La Rosa gives up a ton of home runs, a ton of extra base hits, all to left-handed batters. Last season, he had over a 360 WOBA and an isolated power rating, or this was Gonzalez, over a 360 WOBA and isolated power rating of over 230. And De La Rosa had a WOBA of over 400 allowed to lefties. So for me, at the 1,600 discount, I'm going to be taking Adrian Gonzalez over Paul Goldschmidt and hoping Goldschmidt doesn't go 7 for 7 with 9 home runs, which could definitely happen tonight.
Yeah, this is a night where, honestly, I love playing the sites with flexibility, the fantasy drafts that just have infield or ones with utility spots or anything like that, because I think there's so many good first basemen that I'd rather just, play them. Because we've got 2 big names so far, and I don't think we're even close to halfway done. Nick, I know there are some other names at first that you probably like. Let's keep it rolling.
Yeah, we could spend probably the rest of the show talking about first base, honestly, but I like Goldschmidt. Obviously, $5,000 on FanDuel is really expensive, but if you're going to play Jared Eichhoff, you can easily fit him in. So I think that's the route I'm going to go. Would stack that 3-4 hole with the Diamondbacks against Wood. Talked about how terrible he is against righties, so I like him. I like Rizzo against Alfredo Simon. Alfredo Simon's a fly ball pitcher, doesn't miss bats. The wind's blowing in a little bit in Wrigley, but I don't think it's enough to affect the ball in the air at all. So I like Rizzo a lot. I like Miguel Cabrera in that game against Ryan Vogelsong. I like John Jaso on the other side of that, hitting leadoff against Shane Green. Him and Vogelsong were pretty much identical pitchers last year. Just awful strikeout numbers, high home run rates, high fly ball rates, high hard hit rates. I mean, this game looks like a one to definitely target tonight.
Yeah, I agree with you. Shane Green is definitely a guy who I've got names against tonight. That was a guy I had circled. I definitely like the bats against him. Benny, we've covered a decent amount at first base. Is there someone else you're prioritizing over the guys we've mentioned?
Yeah, I mean, I like Goldie at the top of the list as well. I actually had Rizzo second until I heard about the wind blowing in, because he's 5 of 15 lifetime with 2 home runs against Alfredo Simon. So with the wind blowing in, I've kind of gone in a different direction. So let me throw a couple more names out at you and just give you a quick case here. Jose Abreu going up against Phil Hughes. Hughes allowed a .304 batting average to right-handed bats last year. He wasn't very good against right-handed bats. We know that Phil Hughes' main problem is that he's very home run prone. He gave up 30 home runs in 150 innings last year. And then Abreu is a guy that hits well in righty on righty reverse split situations. Had a 384 WOBA with a 240 ISO score last year. He's 7 of 21 lifetime against Hughes. Doesn't have any home runs, but he does have a handful of doubles. And I think it's just a matter of time with Hughes being an extreme fly ball pitcher and Abreu being a guy with a ton of power that he actually does jack one out against him. So I'd be willing to use Abreu. I think he's going to be pretty low owned. And then another guy who we didn't mention that I like as well, Edwin Encarnacion against Michael Pineda. You look at Pineda's numbers, he's actually been pretty good against the Toronto Blue Jays, with the exception of Encarnacion. Encarnacion is 7 of 22 lifetime against them, does have a home run in that small sample size, has a 399 WOBA and a 295 ISO last year against right-handed pitching. So I think Goldie's going to be the chalk. I think he's a deserving chalk. He's easily the best player. But there is 6 or 7 first base options that I wouldn't be surprised if they were the highest scorer today. So guys like Abreu and Encarnacion are some other guys you can look at if you're trying to go away from the highest owned guy that's going to be on the board today.
Yeah, the problem with first base tonight is I don't know who's going to be the chalk. So, I would say, don't use Goldschmidt because a lot of people are going to use him, but I'm not sure that's true. I think a lot of people will look at Goldschmidt's matchup as being great and look at a bunch of other guys. I mean, there are certainly other guys that I like that we haven't mentioned. I think Chris Davis is number 1 in our home run tool. He's squaring off against Joe Kelly, I believe. Yeah, Joe Kelly and Chris Davis, if you look at, Fangraph's pitch effects, is their best hitter by far against fastballs. And in Joe Kelly's last matchup, Josh Donaldson ranked that way too, and he hit a grand slam. So, pitch effects works against these guys who throw mostly fastballs, which tonight is Joe Kelly and John Lackey, both rank in the top, I think, 6. So Davis is certainly an option. David Ortiz against Ubaldo Jimenez. is in play, and Brandon Belt. So let's talk about how we're prioritizing this tonight, because there are so many. I think if you're going to spend up, I prefer Goldschmidt over Rizzo. I think if you're going to save a little bit, I'm going with Chris Davis, and I think if you're going to save a lot bit, I'm going with Adrian Gonzalez. Is that kind of how everyone feels, or do we have different preferences? I'll start with you, Benny.
Yeah, well, I mean, on DraftKings, you can actually use Davis in the outfield, too. So you can fit him and another first baseman in if you're trying to fit in more than one first baseman, which I think is a great idea tonight because there are a lot of good ones out there. I have Goldie as my number one up at the top of the board, and then I actually go down to Abreu at number 2 and Rizzo now at number 3. I had them switch the other way. But, I mean, honestly, the way I'm going to go about it today is build the rest of your lineup, put all the guys that you want in, and then when you get to first base, there's obviously going to be a guy somewhere in the $4,400 to $5,300 range that'll fit into your lineup that you like. So whichever one of these guys I wind up on, I'm not going to be upset about it because, like we've all talked about, there are legitimately 7 first basemen tonight who I think are, absolute studs in great spots, and I'm not going to be upset rolling out there with any of them.
Yeah, I was going to run down the list, but I'm looking at these other positions. I was going to, ask Collacchi and Nick, but I think we got a lot to cover. So let's get you started, Collacchi, with second base. We've kind of beaten first base to death, so who do you like at second?
For as deep as first base is, I think second is just as shallow, personally. I didn't see a lot of guys that I liked, part of the reason being because I did like Scooter Gennett, but I think his price has come up far too much for me. I know he's been on fire to start this season, but at that price, I'm not sure I'm willing to pay up, especially at this slate with all the other bats in play. But I do like Joe Panik tonight. I don't think his price has risen as much as some other of those Coors bats, and I just can't for the life of me think about why. This guy's hitting second against Jordan Lyles, who has given up over a 350 WOBA to opposing lefties in 2 straight seasons. And, of course, in that Coors Field factor, that game being an 11.5 over-under, I'm taking the guy that's going to get the second most amount of at-bats on the road hitting second in that order in Panik, because to me, 5 or 6 chances in Coors Field is more than worth paying for in cash games.
Yeah, I can't argue with you there. I mean, I think we're going to need some Coors exposure. We kind of overlooked it a little at first base. I know Belt's in play, but Coors Field, again, 11.5 over-under tonight. So last night it didn't pan out, but that just means that a lot of people will be off it tonight. It probably will pan out tonight. So I don't think we can overlook Coors whatsoever. 2 bad pitchers. Peavy may be mediocre, but certainly a bad pitcher for Colorado. So I agree with you there. Nick, who do you like at second? Panik or the Field?
Yeah, there are 2 other guys catching my name, and catching my eye, and it's Jonathan Scope for the Orioles and Daniel Murphy for the Nationals. Those two are really strong. I like Scope a lot. He's batting 7th is the problem here. Against right, he's a reverse splits hitter, and Joe Kelly's a reverse splits pitcher, and so this sets up perfectly for Scope to have a great night. He had a 262 ISO against right-handers last year, 379 WOBA, hit 13 home runs against righties last year, and if you factor in handedness, his ISO 262 and his WOBA 379 are tops among the position tonight, and his hard hit percentage of 40.3 was actually the hardest of any second baseman too when you factor in handedness. So I love Scope tonight, and that offense is clicking real hard.
Benny, who do you like?
Yeah, I'm all over Daniel Murphy tonight. I think you guys are crazy for going in any other direction. Matt Whistler is one of the worst pitchers in the league against left-handed pitching last year. Gave up a 327 batting average, had a whip of 1.97, gave up 10 home runs in 48 innings. Murphy's actually batting cleanup behind Bryce Harper tonight. His price is still pretty reasonable on a lot of the sites. And in his last 6 games, 6 fantasy points, 24, 15, 30, 0, and 33. So you got a guy who's given you, 7x value twice, 6x value once, and 4x value in another one of, 4 of his last 6 games. He's just gone monster scores for you that'll get you into the, on pace for 200, 250 fantasy points, which will win you quite a few tournaments and GPPs, and it'll definitely help you in your cash games. So for me, I think, at a position that's this week, if I can get a guy that can give me a huge number, he's almost a must-play for me. So I'm all over Daniel Murphy tonight.
Yeah, Benny, I definitely not off him. I write up that article for Fantasy Draft every day. I only wrote up 4 hitters, or I only do on a daily basis, and Murphy was one of them. And the way I opened it, I think, is worth noting. Red alert, Matt Whistler is the worst pitcher in baseball against left-handed hitters. Seriously, that's not an overstatement whatsoever. I mean, among all qualified pitchers, he gave up the most WOBA, or the highest WOBA, I should say, to lefties. So, I thought it was too cliche to write up Bryce Harper, but, people may overlook Murphy because they'll just go straight to Harper. But they're definitely both in play. And the guys, actually, I mean, I love Murphy tonight. Obviously, if I'm writing about him when you can start any infielder, I definitely love him. But another guy I would consider at the same price is Dozier. And I think his numbers are a little skewed because he was so bad in the second half last year. But we know in the first half he just killed lefties. He's facing a lefty tonight, a wild lefty in that. So I think Dozier leading off for the Twins is a little bit interesting. And then for tournaments, I really like Dustin Pedroia against Ubaldo. I mean, they've been swinging some hot bats. I really like that whole Red Sox team, to be honest with you. So it's not even just a Dustin Pedroia thing, but he looks like he's swinging his best bat in, over a year right now. He's back to being the laser show. So I like him at second. I actually don't think it's that shallow tonight. I think second is pretty nice, but I agree with you. Murphy's at the top of my list. Does anyone have anything else to say about second, maybe some tournament options?
I just wanted to touch on Scope a little bit. He's actually second on our splits tool behind Jose Abreu, and if you think about that, that's incredible with all of the bats that we do have, and that tool does factor in lineup spots. So Scope hitting seventh is an excellent tournament option. I agree with you, Nick. It's just $2,700 on FanDuel as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Murphy's definitely the chalk for cash. Scope in tournaments is like a great play.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Let's move on to third base. We, of course, will lead it off with Coors Field then. Nick, you want to talk a little bit about Nolan Arenado? Are you auto-putting him in this matchup against Peavy, who was kind of weighted against both? Or are we avoiding Coors Field even further in the infield?
Yeah, I mean, if you can fit it, Arenado's obviously the play, but I just think Matt Carpenter leading off against Chase Anderson and the Brewers. I mean, this Cardinals offense is on fire right now. Carpenter doing all the work at leadoff spot, scoring runs, hitting doubles like he used to last year. I know he got off to a real cold start, but I'm having a hard time getting away from Matt Carpenter. But if I have the cash to, like, if I'm plugging in everyone in that I want, and I have money to go up to Arenado, I'm definitely going to do it because Peavy's not the strikeout pitcher he used to be, and Arenado smashed righties last year. So that's a great. Both are great plays for me.
Benny, what are you doing at third? Do you think Arenado's a must-play, or can we get away with something else?
I mean, I absolutely love Arenado tonight, to be honest. Talked about him in a video this morning. 388 WOBA, 318 ISO in, a reverse righty-on-righty kind of matchup last year. Peavy's been a guy for the last 2 seasons. If you look at his numbers, he's actually been a lot tougher on lefties than he has been on righties. Righties have been hitting him around a little bit. The game's in Coors, so I love Arenado. I also love Carpenter, as everybody who's ever watched my show, in the Benny's Bat section knows. He's a guy that just gets on base, scores runs, gives you a solid 8 to 12 fantasy points almost every game. He's got a great matchup here as well. And then the other guy that I want to mention, I really like Miguel Sanu today as well. Going up against Carlos Rodon. Rodon, right-handed bats, hit 272 against him last year with a 1.59 whip, and this guy was 1 for 2 with a home run against him last year, so I like him too.
What was that in the background? that was a little distracting. But there you go.
That was one of my kids just came in and needs a drink, so I'll be right back.
All right, Collacchi, I know that's tough to follow up, but you could give it a shot. Who do you like at third base?
Well, I think I had a couple names in mind, but now I kind of want to use Benny's son at third base tonight. I think he'd be an excellent option with a high WOBA. But the first thing I'm looking at third base tonight is actually not a guy in Coors Field. I like Nice Moustakas a lot in tournaments against Scott Feldman. Feldman's been a guy his entire career that has basically worked off of his movement away from left-handed hitters. Two-seam fastball, changeup, whatever he has to use to get away from left-handed hitters, he uses it. The problem is he doesn't get far enough away, so I think tonight is a prime spot for a home run from Mike Moustakas in a tournament option. But the thing is, he doesn't have excellent numbers, so I'm not sure I can use him in cash games. Another guy I like is actually Alex Rodriguez against J.A. Happ tonight. I think on sites where he is eligible at third, which is pretty much most of them, he's a play that's going to go under the radar here. And last year he had excellent numbers against lefties, a well close to 400 isolated power rating of almost 300, which are just near top of the charts, kind of like what Carlos Ruiz. David Ortiz was the other night, and he had a home run. So the one thing about those two guys, though, they are GPP option. For cash, I think we've mentioned a ton of expensive hitters, so we're going to need a cheap guy. Kelly Johnson's just 2,100, and he's hitting fifth against Tanner Roark in that Nationals order, or in that Braves order. So at 2,100, he's a guy that you can punt to fit the rest of these bats, and he might have to be the guy for me that I'm using. I hate to fade Arenado, but at just 5,000, I can't fit him and Paul Goldschmidt.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I'm thinking of going cheap at pitcher. I mean, if you're going expensive at pitcher and you're going Paul Goldschmidt, you're eventually going to have to go cheap somewhere, which is why we've touched on the expensive options. I think Arenado's a lower priority for me than Goldschmidt is, which means that I'm probably going with Goldschmidt. So in cash, in order to fit him, you did mention Moustakas, who's kind of a mid-tier guy. You could go that route. If you're going much lower, you could go Justin Turner, although he doesn't, as you say, connect all the dots since De La Rosa is more effective on those left-handed hitters. So I think the sweet spot for me at third base, while I do prefer a different Pirates hitter, is Freese, assuming he's in the lineup. I haven't seen that lineup yet, but he has been hitting third. Let me just double check.
Yeah, he's hitting third.
All right, he's hitting third again, so he's kind of a sweet spot on both fantasy draft if you're going that route, although I don't think I'd use him on a site where you can use any position. But, I mean, we're looking at 3,600 on FanDuel, 3,900 on DraftKings, where he's kind of in the middle. And while Whistler was the worst against left-handed hitters in terms of people who were qualified, Green was actually one of the 5 who was worse in terms of the ones who were unqualified. So he gives it up to them. Freese isn't really a guy that you're going to expect a homer from, like maybe you would from Arenado or some of the other guys, but eventually, you're going to have to go cheap somewhere. And the middle of this Pirates order, I think, is a good spot tonight. Nick mentioned it's going to be a high-scoring game, so I think this could be a good game to, deploy Freese. I really like him only for cash games, though, because he's kind of, just an average singles, doubles type hitter, whereas, you want some power for tournaments. Does anyone have anything else left to say about third? Nick, anything that we haven't covered?
Just 3 more guys that I really like are Maikel Franco, Josh Donaldson, obviously, and Manny Machado. Those last 2 are super expensive, so if you're going to pay up for those are going to be tournament plays because they'll be super low owned because everyone will be on Arenado if they're paying up there. But I love Donaldson's spot. Michael Pineda, fly ball pitcher in a fly ball ballpark with a home run ballpark. Donaldson crushed righties just as much as he crushed lefties last year, so I think he'll definitely be a great tournament option tonight.
Collacchi, anything to add, or should we move on?
I'm just excited to talk about shortstop. I actually like that position tonight.
Yeah, I do too, and there's one guy who stands out to me. It is Mr. Lost at Seager himself. Collacchi was giving me crap for my pun title for an article earlier, but I think Corey Seager is, when we came on here, I knew I liked Goldschmidt, but I knew the one, regardless if I use a pitcher, regardless of who I use anywhere else, in cash games, Corey Seager was going to be in my lineup tonight because that wind, we kind of mentioned Adrian Gonzalez, but, the wind isn't substantial. It's only about 9 to 12 miles an hour, but it's blowing out to right against a pitcher who gives it up to lefties and a lineup full of stud left-handed hitters, including Gonzalez and Seager. I mean, is there any reason not to use Seager, Collacchi? Let's start with you since you were excited about the position.
I do like Seager a lot, for sure, and I do think he's a little bit too cheap considering his spot in the order, of course, the protection he has behind him with some excellent hitters, right-handed and left-handed. And the thing is he can still hit for power and hit for average. I think a lot of guys at that price point are one or the other, and he's one of the guys that can do both. Another option, of course, is Jean Segura, which I think some other guys will talk about. But I did want to mention a cheap guy because I know we talk about a lot of expensive guys tonight because, honestly, you're going to have to find a way to get them in. But Stephen Drew is hitting second against Matt Whistler, and that's an excellent punt at just 2,100 at shortstop on FanDuel, and I think he's cheap as well on DraftKings Fantasy Draft. So if you want to punt a position, middle infield is not a bad selection, and I think Stephen Drew is the guy to do that at 2,100.
Benny, it looks like you're back. Did you ever play Roller Coaster Tycoon as a kid? Are you familiar with that game? All of a sudden your background sounded like the sounds from Roller Coaster Tycoon of all the kids having fun on the roller coasters, until things go bad. But that was exactly what it sounded like. I was trying to figure out what it was.
Yeah, my house is crazy. I really need a vacation, like a month, 2.5 months, something like that. Just But anyway, I mean, to the more important stuff here. Shortstop, I agree. I mean, Seager's the guy that stands out to me. He'll be my cash game play and my cash game lineups. He's pretty reasonably priced on most of the sites that I play on as well. I don't think he's too expensive yet. I think Correa is somebody you can always look at if you're looking for tournament upside. Ventura's not a bad pitcher, but again, I mean, Correa's shown that he can hit off everybody, even in righty-on-righty matchups, 360 WOBA, 220 ISO, that's not bad. But one guy who I really like as well, Francisco Lindor, has been having a really good start to the season. Got a decent matchup against a left-handed pitcher. I'm not a huge fan of Drew Smyly. He's very tough on lefties, but right-handers have been able to hit him a little bit. Had about a 250 batting average allowed, higher whip against right-handed bats, and he also gave up 11 home runs in 51 innings. So we saw Lindor batting third yesterday, jacked a home run out yesterday. He's another guy that I'm looking at as a swerve in tournaments. But for cash games, I mean, Seager is the guy by far. And honestly, if I can fit Seager into a lot of my tournament lineups, I think I'm going to do that as well because he's just been so consistent, so solid. The matchup is so good. There's just so many good things going in his favor today that he is kind of an obvious play, but sometimes you got to put the obvious guys in there if you don't think that there's anybody else that, can really outscore them at the position. And when the obvious guy is not incredibly expensive, it makes sense to just roll with them and try to beat people with the other, 8 or 9 spots on the roster.
Yeah, and I don't think he's going to be that chalky in tournaments because you got the Coors guys on, Trevor Story, who's leading the league in homers. You got Crawford, who led the team in ISO. So, if you really feel good about a guy, I like using them as a building block in tournaments. And, there are very few hitters that I'm like, there are no alternatives that I find as, like for Goldschmidt, there are cheaper alternatives. For some of the second basemen there are. But for Seager, he's just kind of the guy who stands out to me. So I think if you rotate everything else, you could just use him. Nick, are you on board with us on the Seager love train, or are you going to start your own train?
Yeah, 3 guys you guys all mentioned are catching my eye at shortstop. Steven Drew, I think I'm gonna have to pay down somewhere if I'm putting on both these expensive bats in there. So Steven Drew's really catching my eye for cash games at 2,100 on FanDuel, batting second against Whistler, and then Segura and Seager, like you guys already hit on. Those are the other 2. So those 3 are definitely going to be in all of my lineups.
All right, we got some limited time left, so let's finish up. I think we're done with shortstop unless, Collacchi, you have any more to mention? Doesn't sound like it. Okay, let's move on to outfield because I think we've kind of sold Coors horribly short, at least so far. We kind of mentioned Arenado as a, just because we had to, but I think the outfield is where we're going to start talking about where we actually feel good about using these Coors hitters. There are a ton of outfielders, but I do think for cash games, Denard Span should be a building block against awful Mr. Lyles of the Colorado Rockies. Now let's go to you, Nick. Do you agree with me that Span is the first guy you're plugging into your outfield in cash games? There's so many options, but I mean, he led the team in WOBA against righties. He's hitting first in Coors Field.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to ignore Denard Span. I mean, it's not the first guy I'm plugging in. Bryce Harper is the first guy I'm plugging in, even with this price all the way up there at 5,500 against Whistler, like we talked about, was terrible against lefties. But Span's right there beneath Harper for me. Bat leadoff, he should get 5 at bats, maybe 6 in this game, especially if it goes as planned against Lyles in that terrible bullpen. So I can't argue with Span at all.
All right. Who else do you like at the outfield position? Let's just keep going as long as we're there because you're going to need at least speed to fill them. So let's fill an outfield. We got Span, we got Harper. Who else?
Jeremy Hazelbecker still is not. His price is not coming up at all on FanDuel. Still 2,300. He's got 18, 18, 18, 21, and 27 FanDuel points his last 5 games, and he's still 2,300 facing another righty bat in second again. I mean, he's a lock and load for cash for me.
There you go. We got 3 guys in Nick's outfield. Josh, why don't you field an outfield for us? Maybe some of the same guys, I would guess.
Yeah, I like Span a lot too. If you are picking on some of those outfielders in Coors, I like him over Blackman because of Blackman's struggles and Jake Peavy's changeup. It's one of the reasons why he's been so good against lefties. And you remember in Coors Field, a lot of those pitchers lose movement, not the changeup. The way that's used is, of course, to change speed, and that Dalvin rotation isn't affected too much by the thin air up there. So Span over Blackman for me. But another left-handed outfielder I like tonight is, of course, John Jaso when he's eligible in the outfield. But Gregory Polanco Polanco. I really love this guy tonight, power, speed. I know Ricky wrote up a lot about him and really likes him, so I want you to talk more about him. But the other guy, of course, Bryce Harper, I don't think he goes without mention, of course, with the matchup against Matt Whistler. But I think he's going to be lesser owned than a lot of people would think tonight. So consider him for your tournament lineups. If you're going to go contrarian, you usually like to fade a guy like Harper. Don't necessarily stay away from him because of that tonight, because I do think he will be lesser owned with all the other high expensive bats to be used.
Yeah, let's get into Polanco and why I love him so much tonight. I mean, his numbers last year weren't fantastic against righties. They were good. I mean, we're talking about 323 weighted on base, 274, 338, 409 slash line. But I do think he's one of those young hitters who's getting better, first of all. I mean, he's looked really good at the beginning of this season. And we already mentioned just how bad Shane Green is. He's literally worse than the worst in terms of the qualified. So Green just absolutely gets ripped by left-handers. And Polanco batting in that 6th hole in the lineup I don't think is a spot that would ever prevent him from running. And we already mentioned that McCann is out, and you look at on Fangraphs, Jared Saltalamacchia's RSB number, which is, basically how many stolen base runners he throws out compared to the average. And basically for his whole career, he's been well below average. So not only do I think that Polanco has a chance for some hits, maybe even some homers as a guy who, rates pretty well against righties, and this pitcher completely struggles against him, but I think he's got a chance at stolen bases too. So I think he could do legit anything tonight. And, he could get to 20 fantasy points more than one way, which is what you love for an outfielder. So I love Gregory Polanco tonight. He's a guy who I don't think are on many people's radars, but he's certainly on mine. Benny, who do you like at the outfield?
Yeah, I actually have, I like a lot of the guys that you guys mentioned too, but just to throw a couple other names out there for you. Scott Feldman is pitching against Kansas City today. 294 average allowed last year to right-handed bats with a 139 whip. Lorenzo Cain is a guy who normally isn't great in righty-on-righty situations, but when I was looking through this Kansas City team, the lefties, Feldman's actually tougher on lefties than he is on righties. The lefties have actually struggled. Feldman has some pretty good numbers against basically everybody on the Kansas City lineup, with the exception of Lorenzo Cain, because he is so bad to right-handed bats. Cain is 7-13 lifetime against Scott Feldman, so I think he's a guy that's going to be off people's radar that could have a big game today. Houston's a great hitter's ballpark, so I have no problem rolling out Lorenzo Cain there. Again, we talked about it last time. If you can find other really good players in really good spots that other people aren't using, that's the kind of thing that can help you win a tournament. So Lorenzo Cain is one of those guys for me. Another guy for GPPs who I love, I think if Jock Peterson's probably going to get a start for the LA Dodgers tonight. Now, when you talk Ruby De La Rosa, the things we always say about him is he can't get a left-handed bat out. He allowed 20 home runs in 87 innings to left-handed bats last year. He allowed a .315 batting average with a whip of 1.75. Well, what's the one thing that Jock Peterson does really well? Hits home runs off of bad right-handed pitching. So if you're going to get a bad right-handed pitcher trying to throw to Jock Peterson, he's going to be in the lineup because Van Slyke is hurt, Crawford's hurt, Ethier's still out, and him and Klay Thompson's brother are basically splitting time in the outfield right now. So whenever they go up against a right-handed bat, Peterson's the guy that gets in there. And again, this is another one of those guys that's a little bit off the radar, but has huge upside. I mean, we saw Peterson go for 7 or 8 home runs in 3 weeks last year. When he gets hot, he just starts bashing them out of there. So he's starting to hit a little bit. He's getting some playing time now. I think he's going to be a really low-owned guy that has huge tournament upside. Definitely going to help me win a seat to the World Championships on DraftKings tonight. So calling my shot right now with that one.
There you go. We don't even need a bold call for Benny. Let's keep going with some outfielders. I think this guy is cash considerable in Hunter Pence. We didn't get to him yet, but people are going to look at Lyle's splits and see that he's worse against lefties and maybe focus on span. But Pence actually second on the team and weighted on base against righties last season. And it's not like Lyle's is good against anyone. He's in Coors Field. He's probably going to get blasted, and I don't think it's only going to be the lefties who get the hits. So I think you certainly can consider Hunter Pence maybe as your third or outfielder for cash. He hit a homer yesterday, so he's kind of feeling it. I mean, Gerardo Parra, as long as we're talking about that, I think is a decent cheaper option to some of the expensive Coors bats. He continues to be there. But looking at some guys that I really like for tournaments, let me just name one for you, and that's Jason Hayward. We're talking about this wind blowing in for the Cubs, and we're talking about Anthony Rizzo. Well, I think it affects Rizzo more than it affects Hayward if that wind is in fact blowing in and they're playing, Alfredo Simon, who kind of is not very good, or at least a guy that I was ever consider using. And Rizzo's known for those big towering home runs, but you watch Hayward and he lines the ball more often than not. I mean, he's a big fan of those liners into the gaps. So I think while Rizzo's kind of like a pure bomb hitter, Hayward's a guy who against a bad right, he's just going to line, some doubles. And so even if the wind is blowing in, which it isn't even that strong, I think Hayward, guy hitting second, is a guy who could score a lot of runs with the big hitters behind him and a guy who could see himself on base 3-4 times against Alfredo Simon while everyone's focusing on Rizzo. So there's a guy I like for tournaments. Let's go to you, Nick. Are there any other tournament bats in the outfield that you like?
Yeah, I think Benny touched on Miguel Sano earlier, but he's the outfield on FanDuel, so I was going to touch on him here. But I love Sano tonight. I know he has huge strikeout numbers, but he crushes the ball at home, and they'll be at home tonight. And I know it's small sample size, 95 career plate appearances against lefties, but he's a 51% hard hit rate and a 422 BABIP. If he can just get contact, the ball he's almost an automatic lock for a hit. It's 226 ISO against lefties, 500 slugging percentage, 370 WOBA. I mean, I think he's in a great spot tonight against Rodon, who struggles against righties pretty badly, and on the road.
Collacchi, let's go to you for tournaments. We are approaching, the end of the outfield. So let's say we got a few spots left for our tournaments. Who are we plugging in?
I think a guy that will go under-owned in tournaments because he lacks that power upside for sure, but he does have stolen base upside. Billy Hamilton's hitting first tonight, and he has one stolen base. John Lackey is really slow to the plate, and if you haven't seen him pitch, when he lifts that leg, it takes like maybe 3 seconds for him to go through his windup. Nobody can throw out Billy Hamilton with that stretch. And if John Lackey does move to the slide step, that's just going to help the rest of those Reds hitters. But I really like Hamilton leading off because he's going to have a chance to steal more bags than he would at the bottom of that order, given the extra at-bat or two based on the lineup construction there.
Yeah, and let's go with one more guy who's somewhat cheaper because there are so many options tonight. I do think it's worth giving a bunch tonight on a bigger slate where you could kind of mix and match these guys, especially with the salaries. Benny, you mentioned you were worried the other night about Fegley getting pinch hit for. Here's another guy kind of like that. How about Aaron Hicks, who I think is at the top of the lineup tonight? I got to double check that. I thought I saw he's hitting second. He is against a lefty. He's kind of a platoon guy, kind of like Fegley, who they put him in. But he hit 3-0. Let's go with the slash line, 307, 375, and 495 against lefties last year. Even on a good Yankee hitting team, he would have ranked second and weighted on base against lefties. Good hitters park. So I think there's a lot of things in play for Hicks, except for the fact that, if a left-handed reliever does come in later in the game, he probably won't last. So there is that risk with him. Does anyone have anything else left at outfield, or should we get to the bold calls?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Nick. All right.
I kind of like Scott Schebler at 7 for the Reds a little bit. I kind of lost my train of thought there, but I know he has a huge strikeout rate. The sample size is extremely small, 48 plate appearances against righties, but he crushes the ball, 44.8 hard percentage. 267 ISO, 556 slugging. I know he's batting 7th tonight, but Lackey is a fly ball pitcher for the most part. I mean, he gives up contact. He's not a huge strikeout pitcher like he used to be. So I kind of like Scott Schebler as a tournament flyer for the cheap.
Benny, take it. Sounds like you had someone else.
Yeah, actually I have 2 sets of outfielders that we really didn't mention. We didn't mention the guys in Detroit, but they're going up against Ryan Vogeldong, who got that nickname for a reason. So guys like J.D. Drew and Justin Upton, I think, are in decent spots. And then also we mentioned Hasselbacker or whatever his name is, but we didn't mention Gearchuk and Piscotty, who are also hitting well. I think basically the whole top of that St. Louis Cardinals offense is something that you can look at there. I mean, Chase Anderson is not anybody who I'm going to be scared of. Right-handed bats actually had a higher average against him last year. They hit 280 as opposed to 260 for the lefties. So I think guys like Gierchuk and Piscotty you can add in there as well. So any of the outfielders on St. Louis, any of the outfielders on Detroit are also options. So that just makes it that much of a bigger list for you guys tonight.
And just to follow up on Benny right there.
Go ahead.
Gritchuk was actually a reverse splits hitter as well. He smashed righties more than he hit lefties last year, and Chase Anderson's a righty. Benny talked about his reverse splits as well, and then Justin Upton was the same way for the Padres last season, and he's kind of doing that this year as well with a couple homers off Ulyss Chassin, or was it Chassin or Juan Nicasio yesterday? So I think he's in a great spot as well.
Yeah, and just one thing I was noticing is that Colin Ray, the pitcher for San Diego tonight, has some reverse splits. So maybe we overlooked Michael Franco as a tournament option, but just something to think about. Let's get to bold calls since we have about 5-ish minutes left. I think there are going to be some interesting ones tonight. Let's start with you, Collacchi. I think you were thinking about yours before the show. So what kind of thought did we put into it tonight?
I have two, one pitching and one hitting. My hitting one tonight is I think Clint Robinson at less than 1% owned is going to hit a home run. He is hitting seventh for that Washington Nationals team, but he's going against Matt Whistler, who can't get anybody out that stands in that left batter's box. So I think Clint Robinson at under 1% is going to hit a home run. My pitching one tonight, I think Jarrett Eidholt, his breaking ball is going to be on tonight, and he gets 10 strikeouts against the San Diego Padres. At that price, you can't beat that.
Well, I hope you were right about that, because I will be a rich, rich man at the end of the night if that's true. And if it's not, I'm going to be looking for some garbage cans to live in. So let's move on for the bold calls. Let's go to you, Nick. What do you got for us?
I don't know if it's too bold, but I'm going to say Wellington Castillo and Paul Goldschmidt go back-to-back at some point tonight, homers each.
That is bold. Not just that they're going to hit homers, but they're going to do it back-to-back of each other. So that's, the odds of that go up even infinite more. I'm trying to do the math in my head, but it's not happening. If I had a calculator, maybe I could figure it out. But, Benny, what do you got for us in terms of boldness? Can you beat back-to-backers?
Yeah, I actually can, because I'm not even going to say Jock Peterson hits a home run tonight as my bold call, because it's a lock. So it's not even a bold call. So the bold call is going to be he hits 2 home runs tonight.
Yeah, I was gonna go with that for Polanco. Is that that not only does he hit a home run, he steals a base as well. So I think he's gonna do both, because I think he has the potential for both. He's gonna be up a bunch of times against this pitcher that's less than what's the word I'm looking for? I don't mind going against him. So I think him, I think Jaso, I think a bunch of those guys in that lineup. We mentioned Freeze are going to be some good plays. That Pirates stack going to be under-owned. All right, we got 3 minutes left. Is there anything we didn't cover for the slate, or maybe Let's go with our favorite stacks of the night, because we covered different guys. Is there one stack that you think is your go-to, your ace in the hole for tournaments, Benny?
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it in the video today and just mentioned it before. I really think people are sleeping on how many runs the St. Louis Cardinals are going to score tonight against Milwaukee. Chase Anderson is not a guy that I think is a good pitcher. The top of that Cardinals order has been pretty hot right now. We mentioned a lot of these names. We talked about Gierchuk. We talked about Carpenter. We talked about Hasselbacher. The only other guy I think that we haven't mentioned up there is Matt Holliday, maybe, might be the only guy that we haven't mentioned of the top 5 that they have in that order there. And honestly, I don't even hate him. He's a professional hitter, so you throw him in there as well. Those 5 guys, I think, are going to be, a stack that not a lot of people are going to go to, and I think that they put up, I'm going to say second bold call of the night. I'm going to say St. Louis puts up 10 runs tonight.
Yeah, that is bold, because 4.1 projected runs for Vegas is less than the Twins, less than the White Sox, less than some other teams. So they're not one that Vegas is projecting for a monster night. Nick, who's your stack tonight?
I really like that Diamondback stack, that 1 through 4 hole. Segura, Chris Owings, Paul Goldschmidt, and Wellington Castillo. Their projected runs is like less than 4, like 3.5, somewhere around there. So I think they could go off for 8 to 10 runs as well tonight. Collacchi,
who's your stack tonight?
I think we're all on the Dodgers, but I'm going to go in a different direction here. I think with all of the people on on Strasburg this morning, a lot of people are going to forget about that Atlanta Braves stack. Freddie Freeman, elite numbers so far. I'm looking at it now, 12 for 31 with 3 home runs against Roark. Roark did not know he was going to pitch, so the chances of him having his elite stuff is not great. And that bullpen's not excellent either. So I think the Atlanta Braves have a chance to score 8 or more runs, which is definitely a good thing considering their ownership will be very low given the output of the slate from the beginning.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with that Pirates team that I've been harping on. I like a few of their lefties. They do have a bunch of righties in there, but I do think that, Green is not a good pitcher, and, the likes of McCutchen, Marte, I have confidence in them hitting against him. So I wish they had some more lefties in this lineup. I'll be targeting the lefties in cash. There's only 3 of them. But, Pirates projected for 4.6 runs, so they're getting a little more love from Vegas. They are my preferred stack for tournaments. That is all the time we have for today. We've got that free roll coming up on Friday. We've got all the MLB tools up on rotocurve.com in case we forgot something, overlooked something, anything like that today, so you could double check. But until Friday, we're out, and good luck tonight on a monstrous slate.